Thank you for a very interesting presentation. Actually, if it will be possible to have it in PowerPoint or just in text format, I think it will help us greatly to keep, because it's one thing to hear and communicate it. Should be also educational process. It means that we need to have that stuff with us back to home. But my question is following. Many donors, actually, we are think tanks, or our legal system is based in a way that we mainly depending on the donor money. And mainly they are grants, which donors bringing also with there some unique limitations. Because they are not the project-oriented, many of them, but output-oriented. You're always getting that there should be a book, such thick, such color. Doesn't matter. Even you are understanding that, for example, that message should be delivered by the small papers and something like this, it's very difficult. How are you proposing to deal with this?
Yeah.
Like when you stuck with something that you perfectly understand that you should produce something that will just get dust on the shelf and not able to communicate that message even to the donor who is ordering that.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Again, it's the point about knowing your audiences first, including your donors or prospective donors, which is to go to them and find out what it is they want. And they'll rarely say to you, I want a book on this. They'll say, I want to change this policy or this. And then you say to them, right, let us go and work out how to do that best. And then you go back to them with a proposal, whether that's a policy brief or a book or, you know, the full variety of tools that you have. You can go back to them. But we're lucky enough having an endowment which supports our work in Washington and Moscow. It's a double-edged sword, because if you don't feel the need to be relevant to the market, it can kill you. Because you can be arrogant and simply sit in an ivory tower and study whatever you think is interesting, and you know the money's going to be there to support it. On the other hand, having an endowment allows us to do important work that is sometimes risky and controversial, that governments want but can't say they want, because we don't have to worry about ticking off a funder who's going to say, I'm not funding that, I'm getting pressure from X, Y, and Z governments. So it's a halfway house. Now, to pay for our new offices that we've opened in the Middle East, China, and Europe, we're having to fundraise. What we do at the outset is to produce what we call our new vision, our mission statement for the institution as a whole, which is to bring important indigenous views from all of these crucial regions to policy formulation, particularly in the United States, given the change of presidency. We ask them to fund that, and then we give them some generic ideas about how we're going to do it. We don't go into the weeds of how we do it, because we don't want to be bound over. We don't allow them to say to us, you must produce X, Y, or Z. And by and large, we've found we're getting huge sums of money in the 10, 5 to 1 million mark from governments, foundations, and so forth, because the timing of our vision is a good one. 8 years of George Bush and his policies, and a chance for a new beginning. And foreign policy, where it is around the world in such a crucial and desperate state, people are buying into that vision without having to tell us, you must produce 3 books or 2 papers or 4. So the important thing is to make sure you say to them at the outset, we're trying to change X. Then let us find out how we're going to do that, and leave that to us. And that's the best way I can advise to do it. Otherwise, you will end up more products on your bookshelves gathering dust. Yeah.
Yeah. Got it.
Okay. Can you introduce yourself?
Igor Montano. Igor Montano. I'm from. Yeah. Smart planning. Of course, it looks nice, but how do you treat the authors from your organization when they break the deadlines? They are not committed, or they are committed, but they do not present the publications in time, etc. In this case, of course, you have some troubles in implementing what you have planned as usual. The second point is sometimes, of course, we have a target institution, we try to engage, but if we are critical, then they reciprocate in, let's say, blocking any communication with them. What is your strategy? And third point, sometimes not everything is planned. Is the top priority, is becoming the top priority. Some emergencies appear, and how do you treat the emergencies? Do you have a kind of strategy of communication for emergency situation or topics? Thank you.
Yeah, on the first point, a lot of our publications miss their deadlines. It's infuriating. It really is. And the best thing we can do is to, when we do our planning meetings in every February, is to put a timetable on everything. And a lot of it is donor-driven. So we just basically have monthly meetings, and we look. I keep a chart, rather like this is my global calendar, which is all our work and all the external news pegs and so forth. I'll go through it once a week and once a month and once a quarter to make sure everybody is on track, and then we adjust accordingly. And if people are getting behind, we have person-to-person meetings. And if they say, I'm not going to make it, then we go to the donors and we talk. But it's expectation handling. It's management of people's expectations in the donor community is important. Don't go to them on October 30th when the deadline's the next day and say, we're going to miss this deadline. Make sure you plan accordingly. But, you know, if you don't have people like me to do this for you, make sure the scholar themselves has it. Just make sure at the outset of the process they know they can come and declare emergency if they know they're going to miss their deadline, and it's not going to be a big deal. It's managing expectations. About not everything's planned, true. When the Iraq War was happening, you know, we hadn't planned. Carnegie was the only think tank to oppose the Iraq War, not for ideological reasons, but for good policy reasons. We hadn't planned to do anything for that. But we rushed and realized this was the most crucial thing in foreign policy terms facing the United States. And several of our scholars got together and produced a paper saying, here's why you shouldn't do it. Yes, you can overthrow Saddam easily. This is what will follow on afterwards, and you're not well equipped to deal with it. Here's a better alternative. Proper coercive, stepped-up coercive inspections, which became the policy of the German and French governments. You know, we find a way, again, keeping an eye on the external events. That's my job, to say this is more important. All our resources must go into it. Russia, Georgia, in August, everybody was on vacation. My job was to phone them up at their dashes or wherever else and say, help, quick. We did 130-something interviews in 1 week after the invasion. We then set about producing policy briefs on getting Russia right, on getting US-Russian relations back on track. We pulled together, I think, 8 former US and Russian ambassadors to Moscow and DC and got them to formulate a joint statement of how to get back on track, which we then put in the International Herald Tribune so a wider audience would see it. You know, we react quickly. We just don't go on vacation when it happens. I'm sorry, and I missed your second point.
Institutions which are not very happy that you criticize them and they block any kind of communication. They do not show to the presentations, they do not want to respond to the calls, they do not want to accept meetings.
Yeah, well, look, we're opening up in China, Russia. We're in Russia. I've been in Russia for 15 years. The reason we're there is because we think we produce a better product by listening to real people on the ground and having their views involved in that product. Middle East, we're not in these places because they're great fun places to be and to live. We're in them because they're difficult, because they're emerging, they're important to world peace and to global economics. And we have to tread very carefully. We have a rough time from the Russian tax authorities. We have a rough time in China. But so long as we are not behaving like a human rights NGO, because we're not, and constantly criticizing or benchmarking governments to be like us, different people in different democracies emerge in different ways. What we're about is helping them do it in their own way. In the Middle East, for example, you've got all the other think tanks in Washington are looking at the Middle East peace process because that's what Washington does. We're looking at every single country in North Africa and the Middle East and saying, what's your real political situation? What are your political groups like? And how do we help you build your version of democracy from the ground up? So it's not going to look like Virginia or Maryland. It's going to look like what you want and what works for your people. So, you know, we do things which we think are helpful locally. It hasn't stopped certain people or certain groups from not liking what we're doing because they think we're going to promote a colour revolution or we're going to do this, that or the other. That's not our job. If that's the way democracies evolve, they evolve that way. But our job is to try and help. And so we try and get that point across. But yes, we have a problem, and some people don't like what we do. But again, we try to make sure we're not hectoring from the sidelines. We're producing empirical research and trying to produce a better policy, workable policy formula as a result, and not just simply saying, be like us.